Unitarian Universalist congregation. My name is Patti Kies, and I am the worship facilitator for today's service, and so glad to see you. Our musician today is Alex Chilson. Childcare is available. We are glad to have Arthur Thexton as our guest speaker. You may or may not have read announcements this week that included his bio, long history of a lot of wonderful background, and what he's speaking about today is our spiritual lives. His bio talks about his professional life and his community service life, but I'm going to let him narrow it to what he'll choose to narrow it to, and if you want to review this week's announcements, you can find out the rest. It's just great to see you. I want to extend a special welcome to any visitors and guests we have. I hope you will join us all after the service for coffee and conversation, and that is really where the announcements begin. Our coffee hour that we have been doing in the outdoor grass and parking lot area has been voted to be moved inside to stop hauling things out of doors and to stop hauling things up the steps. It has also been voted that we will make masks optional. And with that, I'm going to remind you that we have these pink cards by the masks at the table that's at the head of the stairs. If what you are needing or wanting is more social distance in addition to masks, you'll take the responsibility yourself to let others know. This is one method. Use any method that is amenable to you personally to protect your own distance, okay? If you have questions or concerns, please see a board member and make sure that they are heard. Okay. And would you now please center yourself for worship?
May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and in miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other.
We're going to find out what I didn't do.
They're so safe you can't operate them anymore.
I'm going for matches because when you can't operate something, you just say, I know there's another way. And there is. So, if you would. Each Sunday, we light our flaming chalice, a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. So if you would, join me in saying the words that are here on the wall. I will move out of the way. May this flame kindle within us the warmth of compassion, the glow of love, the fire of commitment, and the light of truth. Here together, we scatter and nurture seeds of spirit, service, and community. And then if you will join us in singing hymn number 6.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I'm in my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, Disappointment pierced me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to love.
So the story for all ages is When God Made You by Matthew Paul Turner, and it is illustrated by David Catrow. And I'm going to tell you that the illustrations were what pulled me into this story. Actually, this story is a poem. You, when God made you all shiny and new. An incredible you, a you all your own, a you unlike anyone else ever known. An exclusive design, one God refined. You're a perfectly crafted one of a kind. 'Cause when God made you, somehow God knew that the world needed someone exactly like you. You. God thinks about you. God was thinking of you long before your debut. From the very beginning, amid history and time, you, little one, never left God's mind. God imagined your eyes, your head's shape and size, and knew what you'd look like when you felt surprised. God pictured your nose and all 10 of your toes, the sound of your voice. God had it composed. The lines on your hands, your hair, every strand. God knew every detail like it was all planned. Out of billions of faces, from cultures, all races, people God made from all different places, God knew your name. Your picture is framed. God's family without you would not be the same. 'Cause when God made you, this much is true. The world got to meet who God already knew. You, when God sees you, God delights in what is and sees only what's true. That you, yes, you in all of your glory, bring color and rhythm and rhyme to God's story. Now I'm going to ad-lib just a second. Look at the sadness on the artist's face. I have failed. For a while. Okay. The sadness on the artist's face. He's got this flower that he's chalked on the ground. But the flower is no longer beautiful. It is past its prime. This is like the rising action of the book. Even though the poem doesn't go there, the pictures do. Thank you for telling me I failed. So be you, fully you, a show-stopping review. Live your life in full color, every tint, every hue. Discover, explore, have faith but love more, and learn and relearn all that God made you for. Use your talents and passions, those gifts that God fashioned. Think up ideas and then put them to action. 'Cause God loves you creating, your true self displaying. When light on the inside through art is portraying. When you make believe, the stories conceived, the heroics, the magic, those tricks up your sleeve. When you dance alone, spinning like a cyclone, being whoever, whatever, in a world all your own. God smiles, and here's why. In the spark of your eye, a familiar reflection shines bright from inside. You see the cracking egg? 'Cause when God made you and the world ood and odd, in heaven they called you an image of God. You, when God dreams about you, God dreams about all that in you will be true. That you, God's you, will be hopeful and kind, a giver who lives with all heart, soul, and mind. A dreamer who dreams in big and small themes, one who keeps dreaming in journeys upstream. A mover, a shaker, a lover of nature. A builder of bridges, you, the peacemaker. A you who views others as sisters and brothers and lives by 3 words: love one another. A confident you, strong and brave too. You being you is God's dream coming true. 'Cause when God made you, all heaven was beaming. Over you, God was smiling. Too many, and already dreaming. At this point in the service, we're going to go to our sharing of joys and sorrows. Each week, we build our sense of community by sharing the milestones in our individual lives, the joys and sorrows that make up who we are. If you have something to share, you will come forward to the microphone. At that microphone, we were already doing masks optional. Tell us your name and what's on your mind. Take a stone from the first bowl, and as you do so, when you are finished, place the stone in the bowl with the water and let the ripples carry your concerns out to the wider community.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maria. Yesterday, I got to go to a dog breeder and help my daughter Kelly pick out a golden doodle puppy. Kelly and me and my oldest grandchild Donovan got to go, so it was just so delightful, and I cannot wait for them to be able to bring him home.
I'm Rusty with Ann. Our son is having a little relapse with a bout with cancer, so we're very hopeful. So.
I will come down with that microphone. I'm going to place one last stone in the bowl that represents the joys and sorrows that have not been spoken, and then we will sing our response. And he quick caught Alex because a meditation placed here.
Well, in order that we might more fully hear the joys and sorrows that have been expressed, I thought we could enter into that place of honesty and silence, which is known by many names, the period for silent meditation and prayer.
At this time in the service, we placed our offertory. Each week, we take up the offering, through which we remind ourselves that we have symbolic as well as practical gifts. We do the funding of our budget and programs, and we finance the comfort and beauty of our building. We could submit those pledges easily any time, but we pass the plate during the service and have this act of giving be made public.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your gifts. So every year, the UUA publishes a book of meditations or essays by a UU minister, and in the year 2000, Out of the Ordinary was published by the Reverend Bucky McKeeman, a prominent Universalist minister who ran for president of the UUA at one time. I particularly like this one. I frequently encounter invitations for regular checkups. Both my doctor and my dentist suggest when my next checkup should be scheduled and are prepared to make appointments and send reminders. I remembered earlier today to look at the furnace filter, which needs to be cleaned or replaced regularly to assist the heater in operating at peak efficiency. The auto mechanic reminds me to check the coolant in my radiator, and so do the autumn leaves. It occurred to me that my religion might need a regular checkup. If my body can develop problems of which I am not made acutely aware by some pang, pain, or pressure, I suspect that my religion can too. Early tooth decay proceeds without palpable warning. The furnace filter becomes clogged silently. And so too, my religion may be needing a regular examination, a checkup. So what kind of pulse taking would be appropriate? You know, the doctors, the dentists, the auto mechanics have records. When was the last service performed? The doctor wants to know if I'm still taking my medications and how much and how often. The dentist checks on the regularity and thoroughness of my flossing. I wonder why ministers avoid asking when I was last at worship and whether my daily devotional practice is as regular as ever. And does that mean really daily or only occasionally when I feel the need? My doctor wouldn't be very happy if my daily medications were taken on a when I feel the need basis. And how are my religious reactions? Is my conviction about the supreme worth of every human personality being neglected? Am I succumbing to slurs upon others and forgetting who are my sisters and brothers, my neighbors? Does my activity reflect a desire to win politically, economically, and socially in ways that ignore or even do violence to my religious convictions? How often do I forget that everyone is a child of the universe? When does it happen? When I read the newspaper accounts of drug dealing, reckless driving, or ecological irresponsibility? You know, it may just be that the idea of a Sabbath, the 1 day in 7, was suggested, or should I even say ordained, so that our religious life would be as well monitored and tended with preventive maintenance as are our teeth, our tonsils, and our transportation. You know, once a week doesn't seem too often. You just never know when you'll have to have your faith in top-notch condition. You know, this past weekend we observed Independence Day and our legacies of both violent and nonviolent protest. After all, the Revolutionary War was nothing if not violent protest. And we are also this year still recovering from the violent events in Washington, D.C., and holding our collective breath until the midterm elections, when we will see if authoritarianism and its threat of violence will prevail or not. Either outcome may be more than a political change. It may be a shift in mood, in attitude, in approach to the many issues which confront us. And if we can maintain our principles, it can be a spiritual opportunity for us, in contrast to the more superficial Bible-toting that we have seen over the past few decades. A spiritual opportunity to have a more thoughtful and sincere approach to the Spirit which inspires and challenges us, and that is however we may think of spirit. So today I'd like to talk about what it means to be spiritual as a Unitarian Universalist and why it's a good thing and how we can actually do it. Now, the classic line is that the trouble with UU spirituality is that our Unitarian side is all about our heads. And those of us who come from that side are all in our heads. And it's true that from the very beginning, those who would eventually become what we now call Unitarians were interested in religion that made sense. They could not help but think about the issues of logic and observation and cause and effect and, verification. And I wonder if some of us are just hardwired this way. And we just need a higher level of science and math, or at least logic in our lives, while others may be hardwired differently to see things in terms of metaphors and symbols, and to see patterns and emotions in a different way than those of us who are head cases, I among them. Now, of course, I come back to my idea of the bell curve, which seems to be everywhere. We're all along that curve somewhere, you know. Mostly we're all kind of within normal limits in the middle 2/3, but we have some of each, just varying amounts, and then some of us are kind of out there on you know, the ends, at the extremes. But for whatever reason, those who needed something different than what was offered by traditional Orthodox religion, which required that mysteries be accepted on faith and obedience to authority be compelled, we rebelled against the organizations that propagated that kind of outlook. And in the case of American Unitarians, rebelling against the puritanical Protestantism, they did so in the context of a time and in an age when higher criticism of the Christian Bible was occurring. And along with that, archaeological discoveries about the early Christians were being made. And science generally was advancing by leaps and bounds. The Enlightenment, as we now call it, grew out of Martin Luther's work to reform the Christian Church of Europe, and with it a new emphasis on individual conscience and individual reading of original source material, the Bible. And of course, this can only lead to individual interpretation and in the light of individual experience, and that path goes straight to rebellion and straight to democracy. But I'm digressing a little bit. So as the inevitable contradictions, both within the Hebrew and Christian texts, were exposed to truly public light and discussion within the Protestant community, the Jewish community having long before done so and moved on, those who decided that this business of taking things on faith alone was just unacceptable. So they had to leave the churches which required such beliefs. And as rebels often do, their disobedience became a total repudiation of all things smacking of Orthodox or traditional Protestantism, and especially Puritanism. That was the Unitarians. And as Unitarianism matured and the United States grew to include a significant population of Roman Catholics, and later the great Jewish migrations, which came from Eastern Europe and Germany, rebels and heretics from those communities joined Unitarian congregations and insisted that what they left behind stay behind. So for many, many decades, Unitarian congregations were characterized by an emphasis on the intellectual, and those who dared consider a larger vision of what a liberal religion might offer were criticized as being backsliders or even worse. And there are still many congregations in our denomination where this view continues to prevail, and where the established, which is to say the older members, want services to be stimulating to their intellects. They want religious education for the young to be about religion rather than an immersion experience. And they want the congregation to provide social opportunity for them and social action in the larger community. I grew up in this kind of atmosphere. My parents were entirely within this worldview. They sent the four of us kids to religious education as a sort of a daycare opportunity, while they attended the services of the brilliant minister, Jacob Trapp, who was actually more than a great intellect. He was a mystic and a poet, but he managed to walk the line which the congregation as a whole demanded at that time, which we're talking the 1960s here. Now, several things have occurred to broaden our religious movement. Firstly, the merger with Universalism, which was always about joy and feeling and gratitude that we were all saved by a generous and redeeming deity in a universe in which love was the most important force. Now, that occurred in 1961. Secondly, the Feminist Movement, which resulted in women becoming parish ministers in increasing numbers, to the point where our ministry really does now represent the population. In fact, women are now a majority of UU ministers, at least in terms of gender. We're still working on issues of ethnic background and race. Now, it's always risky for a male-type person, especially a cis male person like me, to expound upon why this was so important, because it is a statement that women are different. And talking about those differences is a very touchy conversation to have. But I mean, you just can't help but offend somebody if you spend any time talking about this. And it's probably worth a whole separate sermon, and which will not be today. But without question, women in ministry have changed our movement, and they have changed it for the better. Thirdly, I think the Pagan Movement, which insisted that we get in touch with nature and all that went with it, including the great sense of mystery and wonder that it insisted upon bringing to our congregations. They even talked us into including them in the sources, which must have had some of those strict monotheistic rationalists doing about 300 RPMs in their graves. It's the opposite of the logical, rational simplicity that ran our Unitarian stalwarts that they wanted as they fled from those other congregations and movements which were talking about believing in miracles and contradictions and mysteries, because that's what faith was. But as we recall from school, there's thesis, there's antithesis, and then there's synthesis. From the thesis of the traditional theistic and very monotheistic religion, especially Judaism, and if you ignore the Trinity, Protestantism and Catholicism. We had the antithesis of classical American Unitarianism, and we are now arriving at a synthesis which tries to balance our need for things that make sense and our desire that we embrace the experiences that are beyond obvious logic. And that is where I think we are today, wrestling with this synthesis. That's what this current talk about having a spiritual life is. Now, a lot of this seems to me to have something to do with the concept of prayer. Now, spiritual life traditionally is bound up in the notion that spiritual people pray. And for most of us, this is a difficult nomenclature because prayer implies a deity, at least traditionally, and therefore the kind of deity with which one can have a relationship. Now, many of us reject that concept as well, kind of illogical based on the available data. But we are surrounded by a society and a culture which talks a lot about prayer, and it behooves us to be in conversation with our neighbors. So how can we have a deep spiritual life without the kinds of prayers that they seem to want to have? Well, firstly, we actually can pray, even if we don't like the label. There are 4 kinds of prayer, and all traditional religions have them: intercession, confession, thanksgiving, and praise. Or, and I think more usefully, please, oops, thanks, and wow. All prayers fall into one or more of these categories. And frankly, even the most devoutly humanist of us has learned to use language like this in times of stress. Prayer does not actually require an external object, and the idea that prayer is entirely inward in both its direction and its effect goes back at least as far as the great Jewish theologian Maimonides, who lived in the 12th century of the Common Era. Now, prayer has a bad name among us religious liberals because we think of it so often as the petitionary prayer, the please prayer, which asks a deity to intercede in our lives. Please help me pass this test. Please help me get this job. Please heal me or my friend. Keep my child from being killed in the military. Please win this football game for me, or the lottery, you know? Now, I have to say, few of us could believe that any deity worthy of the name or worship could ever possibly respond to these kinds of petty requests, particularly as they so often include a request that one person succeed instead of another person, who would thereby lose or fail or worse. In other words, these prayers are so often an expression of a desire that power takes sides in a human conflict or relationship. And I think most of us regard this kind of prayer as blasphemy. No good God could do this and remain good. We don't have nearly as much trouble with thanks, as long as it isn't thanks for saving my child when others were killed in that car accident. Again, that's just a perversion of what religion should teach. If there is a God who is good, we may be certain that God does not play dice with human life. But it's not necessarily bad to cultivate an attitude of gratitude in our lives, because so much of what we have is the product of the generosity of others or the abundance of nature. Now, oops and wow are the prayers that we UUs are most in tune with, I think, whether in the form of meditation or journaling or Tai Chi or even therapy, cultivating the opportunity to seriously reflect upon our lives and acknowledging the beauty and the awe that we feel periodically are the things that we can do without feeling like we are pandering to the majority culture or backsliding into faith without reason. And I know that these things happen to us whether we intend them or not. These moments, they just come to us. So in terms of cultivating a spiritual life, what we can do is cultivate these moments. There's, I say, even by scheduling them. James Luther Adams' famous statement about love not being truly love unless it is institutionalized is analogously applicable here. You can't have a truly spiritual life unless you regularize it in your life and make it a part of your cycle. Now, in the book Everyday Spiritual Practice, which is a collection of essays and sermons by UUs, edited by the Reverend Scott Alexander, who was minister of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and now at Vero Beach, Florida, one of our most prominent UU ministers, the point is made over and over that almost any practice will deepen your spirit, but only if you perform it often. And that means regularly, and that means you got to schedule it. Kind of like Sunday mornings. But if you can do anything this way, then you get the t-shirt. So suggestions in this book include quilting and running and yoga and cooking and fasting and tithing and reading to your partner, keeping a Sabbath, a Shabbat, martial arts, silent retreats, breathing, social justice work, and several different kinds of meditation. Now, several authors say that you must do something daily, something weekly, something monthly, and something annually. Now, coming to services can be the weekly if you take it seriously, and I do recommend it. But it's not often enough, really, to truly deepen your spirit and heal what may ail you. Now, my parents didn't do this. For them, the weekly services and the cerebral exercise was what they sought and all they ever acknowledged needing. And I know that's true for many who now belong to UU congregations, and it's probably true of many of your spouses who are not here. For this very significant proportion of our membership, this talk about deepening spiritual life may seem silly and just another opium for the masses. I know I thought that, if I thought about it at all, for many years. But there's just no telling what will trigger the need for a different connection with the larger universe. Some people are no doubt hardwired for it. Some are hardwired to never experience it. For me, somewhere in the middle of that curve, the bell curve, although more to one side than the other, it may have been, as I think back on it, the experience of the births of my daughters, or my confusion about my behavior and feelings as my marriage to their mother ended. It may have been my experience in clinical pastoral education, CPE, the chaplaincy training that is required for anyone who might one day aspire to become a UU minister. That time with the sick, the dying, the dead, and their families, full of grief and hope, was the most intensively awe-inspiring experience of my life. But whatever it was, I somehow had to start thinking about how I could reconcile myself to the awesome beauty that surrounded me, my own insignificance in that universe, and my responsibility to act and live in a way that had integrity and honor every day. I needed to renew a commitment to grow and to live with the contradictions and the conflicts in my life without being crushed by them. So I started to look for things to do, and I started to say the grace that my high school religious education teacher at the Unitarian Church in Summit, New Jersey, Jack Kessler, of blessed memory, taught me. We give thanks for this day, for our lives, for our health, for our freedom, and for the love we share. That's it. And I started to think more about what it meant when I put on my flaming chalice necklace that I have worn every day since, I don't know, maybe I was in college, I'm sure, because that's when I had the money to buy it. It's over 50 years ago. So 50 years of reminding myself of who and what I am as a UU. And those became my daily. And I looked for opportunities to speak, to preach, because that would help me discipline myself to read and write about important things. And here I am with you. At least, I do that when I'm not at services with my home congregation or somewhere else. So that's kind of my daily and weekly and monthly. And I am not actually entirely sure that attending the annual UU General Assembly qualifies as a spiritual practice, although the worship services there are just astounding. They are drop-dead amazing, especially the service of the living tradition, at which we remember ministers who have died within the past year. We honor retiring ministers and we welcome the new ministers. This is an especially moving experience, especially for me, because I almost always know at least one person in every category. So I guess that's my yearly. But I have been wondering if I should start doing something else as an annual retreat, such as maybe going to a UU summer camp. The essayists in the Everyday Spiritual Practice book all talk about a silent or meditative retreat for a weekend or a week. I am not sure that I am ready or even suited to that kind of discipline, although that may be a good reason for trying it out. So, but I'll just challenge you to work on that. Something daily, something weekly, something monthly, something annually. Now, there are UU alternatives to whatever you came here to escape or avoid. I say that even if you grew up UU, as I did. I'm not escaping anything in the past like that, but there are things I am escaping or avoiding. Prayer does not have to be a dirty word, although it does carry baggage for so many of us. Call it something else then. Just call it my daily moment. my monthly recharge, my annual retreat, emphasis on the treat, like, ice cream. Okay, so for those of us who need more specific instructions, here are some. Go to the resale shop and buy yourself a glass or metal or wood or clay candlestick holder, which you can turn upside down, or maybe even a candy dish, anything which has the right shape when you turn it the right way. This is your chalice, your home chalice. Put one of those tea lights in it. And then every morning when you come into the kitchen to make your morning drink, coffee, tea, or OJ, once it has started, you started the water or poured it, you could glance over at this makeshift object and you could smile. And you could go over to it and light it if you choose and say to yourself, I'm thankful for this day, for my life, for my health, for my freedom, and for the love I share. You don't even have to say it out loud. Just think it. And that's it. It's a thanks, at least on the surface. And once you get into it, it's also kind of a wow and an oops. And for those who do not follow instructions well, or are just naturally inclined to contrariness or even disobedience, do something else. Set aside a shelf or a tabletop somewhere in your house and put mementos on it, which remind you of important people and events in your past. Rocks, shells, tchotchkes, photos, things that gather dust. And then, once a day, just sit down and look at it and remind yourself why it's there. You could pick up one of those objects and hold it, fondle it. Why is it there? Don't tell anybody that it's an altar. Or just before you leave for work or school, or during this continuing pandemic, just going for groceries, which is an expedition. Perhaps even as you sit in the car and it's winter and the seat is cold and so are your ears and your breath is fogging the windshield, put the key in the ignition and let go of it. Or if you have one of those cars that uses a fob, just before you push the start button, put your hands in your lap, and breathe through your nose. Tell yourself that there are going to be 3 good things that happen to you today, and you're ready for them. Then you may start the car. So there are some starting points. Good luck, and may it be so, and may we be so. Our closing hymn is number 95. There is more love somewhere.
I'm gonna keep
I invite the congregation to symbolically create the interdependent web of all existence of which we are but a part by joining their hands for the benediction. These being pandemic times, you may not feel entirely comfortable with it, but if you do, go ahead. This benediction is the one I grew up with. May the love that makes life beautiful, the reverence that makes life holy, and the truth which sets us free lead us onward together into a deepening and growing fellowship of life. Amen, and blessed be.
This old house would have burnt down a long time ago. Make me an angel that flies from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old rodeo. Just give me one thing I can hold on to. It's a hard way to go. When I was a young girl, had me a cowboy. Wasn't much to look at, just a free rambling man. But that was a long time, and no matter how I try, the years just flow by like a broken down dam. Make me an angel that flies from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old rodeo. Just give me one thing I can hold on to believe in this living. It's a hard way to go. There's flies in the kitchen, I can hear all their buzzing, but I ain't done nothing since I woke up today. How the hell can a person